Imagine being humiliated in front of dozens of people by the very person you trusted most, your own brother. That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Rachel Miller, and I've always been the quiet one in my family, the one who never caused trouble. My older brother David, on the other hand, has always been the center of attention. He's charming, outgoing, and people are naturally drawn to him. I used to admire him. I thought we were close, and for years I supported him in every way I could. I helped him with homework when we were younger, covered his chores, and even gave up opportunities so he could shine. I never complained because that's what family does, right? At least, that's what I believed. David had just been promoted at his company, and he decided to throw a huge party at his house to celebrate. Of course, I was the one who helped him prepare. I cooked, cleaned, decorated, and made sure everything looked perfect before the guests arrived. He didn't thank me once, but I brushed it off. I wanted him to have a great night, and I told myself I didn't mind. When people began to arrive, I tried to stay in the background, greeting a few familiar faces and making sure the food was ready. The night seemed to be going well until David called me over. I thought maybe he would finally introduce me as his sister, or even acknowledge how much I had done to help. Instead, in front of everyone, he laughed and said, "This is Rachel, she's been serving me for years." His friends burst out laughing. Even his girlfriend, Lindsay, covered her mouth and giggled. Some people looked uncomfortable, but most of them joined in. My parents, who were standing nearby, even chuckled like it was just a harmless joke. I froze. My face burned as if every single eye in the room was a spotlight aimed at me. My chest tightened, and I could barely breathe. Maid? That's what he called me? After everything I had sacrificed for him, after all the times I put his needs above my own, he reduced me to a joke in front of everyone. I wanted to disappear, to run out of the room and never look back. But instead, I stood there, forcing myself not to cry, holding a tray of drinks like I really was the servant he claimed me to be. In that moment, something inside me broke. The brother I had admired and trusted humiliated me in the cruelest way possible. I realized then that I had been blind to who David really was, arrogant, selfish, and ungrateful. He had used me for years, and I had let him. But that night, in front of all those people, I decided something would change. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Growing up with David was never simple. From the time we were kids, it felt like my role was to make his life easier. Whenever he struggled with schoolwork, I was the one who stayed up late, guiding him through assignments while mine sat unfinished. If chores piled up, I quietly picked up the slack. He got to spend afternoons with his friends while I stayed behind, folding laundry or setting the table. It wasn't that anyone asked me directly. It just became the unspoken expectation. Our parents adored him. To them, David could do no wrong. Every good grade, every small achievement, was celebrated as though he'd won a medal. They called him their star, their pride, their future. I was the one asked to keep things calm, to smooth over arguments, to step aside when attention naturally gravitated toward him. When relatives visited, he was introduced as the brilliant one, while I smiled politely in the background. I told myself it didn't matter. I believed that being a good sister meant standing by him, even if it meant setting my own needs aside. When he needed extra help, I was there. If something went wrong, I was the one who quietly fixed it. I missed birthday parties, school dances, and simple outings with friends because there was always something more important at home, usually involving David. Over time, it became so normal that I hardly questioned it. I convinced myself that family loyalty was worth more than recognition. If he succeeded, then maybe it meant I had succeeded too, in my own quiet way. I clung to that thought whenever the weight of being invisible grew too heavy. Still, somewhere deep down, there was a hope that one day he would notice. That he would thank me, or at least acknowledge how much of my life had been spent making sure his stayed on track. I thought the bond between siblings was built on love and appreciation. I never imagined that the boy I had protected and supported for so long would someday turn that loyalty into a weapon, using it to humiliate me in the cruelest way. Looking back, the signs were always there. The favoritism, the imbalance, the quiet sacrifices I made without complaint. But I never expected him to cross the line between taking me for granted and tearing me down in front of others. That betrayal cut deeper than all the years of being overlooked, because it proved something I wasn't ready to face. David never saw me as his equal. To him, I was just there to serve, to make him look better, to keep the peace no matter what it cost me. That realization didn't come until much later, but the roots of it were planted in our childhood. And when the night of his celebration came, those roots finally showed their thorn. The day of the gathering started early. From the moment I woke up, there was a list of tasks waiting. Groceries had to be unpacked, dishes needed to be prepped, and the entire place was in disarray. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, chopping vegetables, arranging trays, and making sure nothing was out of place. The kitchen grew hot from the oven, but I kept going, moving between counters and stove without pause. After hours of cooking, I turned my attention to the living room. Streamers, balloons, and candles had to be set just right. I shifted furniture around so more guests could fit comfortably and wiped down every surface until it shined. By the time I finished vacuuming, the smell of polish mixed with the aroma of food, filling the house with warmth and cheer. Still, not a single word of recognition came from David. He walked through the rooms, glancing around like a manager inspecting staff, pointing out minor flaws instead of showing any gratitude. When Lindsay arrived, I thought maybe she would ease the tension, but her sharp glance told me otherwise. She brushed past me in her heels, her perfume leaving a trail behind. As I carried a platter toward the dining table, she looked me up and down before turning to David. With a smirk, she whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Your helper's been busy." She didn't bother to use my name. I felt my stomach twist, but I forced a polite smile and set the food down without responding. More guests began trickling in, their laughter echoing through the hall. I tried to keep myself invisible, moving silently with trays, making sure drinks were filled, and refilling snacks when bowls ran. Every time I crossed the room, I caught fragments of conversations, people praising David for his new position, toasting to his future, congratulating him on his accomplishment. Not once did he mention the hours I had poured into making this evening flawless. I wanted to tell myself it didn't matter, that the celebration was about him and not me. But with every passing minute, the weight of being overlooked pressed harder on my chest. My back ached, my hands smelled of lemon cleaner, and sweat clung to my neck, yet I kept moving as though none of it bothered me. Inside, though, unease settled like a stone in my stomach. I sensed the night wouldn't pass quietly. Something about the way David carried himself, smug and careless, made me feel like my efforts meant nothing to him. The dismissive words from Lindsay replayed in my head, sharper each time. I told myself to stay calm, to avoid making a scene, to just get through the night. But a voice in the back of my mind whispered that pretending everything was fine wouldn't protect me from. The music was loud, glasses clinked, and the air buzzed with chatter when I heard my name ring out across the room. David's voice carried easily over the noise, drawing every eye toward me. I was holding a tray of drinks, weaving through the crowd, when he beckoned me forward with a smug grin. I thought he wanted me to hand them out, nothing more, so I stepped closer. He put an arm around my shoulder, pulling me into the circle of his colleagues. Their polished suits and glittering jewelry made me feel small, out of place, but I forced a polite expression. Then, with a booming laugh, David announced, "Everyone, this is Rachel, she's been serving me for years." The words hit like a slap. For a moment, I couldn't process what I'd heard. Laughter erupted around me, some sharp and mocking, others awkward and uncertain. A few people glanced at me with pity, but most just went along with his performance, raising their glasses in amusement. My skin prickled, my cheeks flamed, and the tray in my hands trembled. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The weight of their eyes pressed down like stones, trapping me in place. My lips tried to curl into a weak smile, but the effort felt painful, unnatural. Behind the wall of laughter, I could see my parents standing off to the side. I searched their faces for rescue, for some sign they would step in. Instead, I caught them exchanging small chuckles, as if it were all harmless fun. The betrayal settled in my chest like ice. I wasn't just embarrassed. I was stripped of dignity, made into entertainment for the very people who should have respected me. The humiliation spread through me until it burned hotter than the shame itself. My brother, the one I had stood by through everything, had just reduced me to a punchline in his celebration. I lowered my eyes, clutching the tray so tightly that the edges dug into my fingers. The sound of laughter blurred into a cruel roar in my ears. Every ounce of trust one had once placed in him crumbled in that instant. I felt the sting of tears threaten, but I swallowed them down, refusing to let anyone see me break. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The years of being sidelined, overlooked, and dismissed were nothing compared to this. This was deliberate, meant to elevate him at my expense, and it sliced deeper than I could have imagined. Standing there in front of his guests, my face burning and my heart pounding, I made a silent promise to myself. This wasn't going to be brushed aside. This wasn't going to be forgiven. What he had done would not pass without consequence. That night, in the middle of his laughter-filled living room, I decided, this would not slide. I slipped out of the crowded room as quietly as I could, gripping the tray until my knuckles ached. My chest felt tight, and I knew if I stayed another second, the tears pressing behind my eyes would betray me in front of everyone. I pushed open the kitchen door and leaned against the counter, forcing myself to breathe slowly, willing the sting in my throat to fade. The muffled sound of laughter carried through the walls, each burst reminding me of what had just happened. I closed my eyes, and images from the past flooded in, sharp and relentless. The nights I stayed awake helping him finish school projects while my own assignments sat untouched. The evenings I picked up extra shifts at the diner, so our parents wouldn't have to worry about bills, money that somehow always ended up covering his expenses. The countless meals I prepared, making sure he had a full plate even if it meant mine was smaller. All those years I told myself it was worth it because family came first, because he would do the same for me if the roles were reversed. But now, standing there with my heart aching, I realized how blind I had been. Every sacrifice I made had been taken for granted. He hadn't just overlooked me, he had used me. And tonight, he didn't just ignore all that I'd done, he mocked me for it. My sacrifices had turned into ammunition for his joke. The hurt was raw, but beneath it something colder began to take shape. It was steady, controlled, nothing like the tears I fought back. The humiliation he had dealt me burned, but it also carved a new edge into my resolve. I wasn't going to crumble. Not here. Not for him. I pressed my palms flat against the counter, grounding myself as a clarity I'd never felt before settled in. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about every time I had stepped aside, every time I had swallowed my own dreams so he could chase his. I had lost too much already, and he had the nerve to turn me into a laughingstock. A bitter laugh escaped me, quiet and sharp. He thought he could parade me around, reduce me to a servant in front of everyone he wanted to impress, and that I would keep playing the role. He had no idea what he had just awakened. I straightened, wiped my damp eyes, and steadied my breathing. The humiliation was still there, but it was no longer in control. Determination coursed through me now, stronger than the sting of shame. Right there, in the silence of that kitchen, I made myself a promise. He would regret what he did. One day soon, he would understand the weight of every sacrifice, every slight, every cruel word. And when that moment came, he wouldn't be the one laughing. I returned to the party with my face composed, my steps measured. No one noticed the storm inside me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. On the surface, I looked calm, but behind my steady smile, I was watching. Every word, every gesture from David became fuel for something I was quietly shaping in my mind. He stood in the center of the room, voice loud, hands moving as he told stories about how hard he'd worked to earn his new position. I listened carefully, catching the details. He spoke about projects he claimed to have completed on his own, but I remembered the nights he had shoved those very tasks onto me, insisting he was too busy. He boasted about clever ideas he supposedly came up with, but I knew I had been the one to sketch them out, hidden away while he took the credit. The more he talked, the clearer his arrogance became. His coworkers nodded and clapped, eating up every word, never realizing how much of his image was built on lies. I stayed quiet, letting him bask in their praise, but I stored away each exaggeration like a weapon waiting for its moment. Nearby, Lindsay clung to his arm, smiling proudly as she flashed the sparkling necklace around her neck. "He spoils me," she announced to a group of women, tilting her chin so the gems caught the light. They admired it, whispering about how generous David was. I didn't speak up, but inside I thought about the truth. That necklace hadn't come from his paycheck. It was purchased on our parents' credit card, the one he had maxed out more than once. Piece by piece, the mask he wore in public grew more obvious to me. He was careless, assuming no one would ever challenge his version of events. And why would he think otherwise? For years, I had let him take advantage of me without a word. He believed I would stay silent forever. But as I carried another tray through the crowd, I let the thought settle deeper. Silence had been my mistake. From now on, I would not simply endure. I would gather. I would prepare. And when the time was right, I would reveal the man behind the performance. Each lie he told became another thread I could unravel. Each careless display of wealth he didn't earn became another opening. I didn't need to raise my voice that night or confront him in front of his guests. That would have been too easy for him to dismiss as bitterness. What I wanted was something sharper, undeniable, something that would strike at the core of his carefully built image. By the end of the evening, I knew what I had to do. My revenge wouldn't be loud or impulsive. It would be precise. It would not just humiliate him. It would strip away the facade he had built until there was nothing left but truth. The weeks that followed passed quietly on the surface. David went about his life as though nothing had happened, calling me over to help with errands, expecting me to fall back into the same rhythm as always. I played along, my tone light, my face neutral. I nodded when he barked instructions, offered polite smiles when Lindsay appeared, and never once hinted at what I was truly doing. To him, it looked like I had let the sting of that night fade. To me, it was preparation. He began planning another gathering, smaller than the last, but more important. This time it wasn't about celebrating a promotion. It was about impressing people who held real weight in his life, our parents and, more importantly, his boss. He wanted everything perfect, and naturally, he turned to me to make sure it would be. I agreed, all the while thinking how fitting it was that he was setting the stage for his own undoing. As I scrubbed dishes and laid out silverware, I thought back to the long nights I had carried him through assignments. I remembered the endless hours of work I had done in his shadow, with no credit and no thanks. Now, I finally had the chance to prove the truth, and I wasn't going to let it slip. Every spare moment, I collected what I needed. On an old laptop, I dug through emails where I had drafted entire reports under his name, each timestamp a record of my invisible hand in his success. I printed them neatly, stacking them in a folder, each page a piece of evidence he couldn't twist or deny. Next, I traced the money trail. Receipts showed purchases that didn't match his income, items charged on accounts he had no business using, jewelry for Lindsay, electronics he bragged about, dinners he claimed to have paid for himself, all linked to debt that was quietly piling up. I kept copies of the bills, highlighting the dates and amounts that painted the picture of his recklessness. Then came the most personal part, the times I had filled in the gaps he left behind. Payments for utilities, grocery runs, even car repairs. My name appeared again and again, covering costs he had let others assume came from him. Each record carried the weight of my sacrifices, proof that his carefully curated image had always depended on my silence. While David bragged about his upcoming dinner, I polished glasses and folded napkins, letting him think I was focused on presentation. In truth, I was already imagining the moment when the mask he wore would fall away. I kept my voice steady, my eyes calm, so he would never suspect. By the time the night of the dinner drew near, everything was ready. The food would be served, the table would be perfect, and his guests would arrive expecting to admire him. But hidden among the fine china and neatly folded linens was something far more dangerous. The truth waiting to be revealed. The dining room glowed under soft light, the table set with polished silverware and plates that reflected the flicker of candles. Guests filled their seats, laughter and polite conversation flowing easily as dishes were passed around. David sat at the head of the table, his smile wide, his voice carrying as he boasted about achievements that weren't truly his. I moved gracefully between chairs, pouring water, setting platters down, appearing every bit the obedient sibling he believed me to be. At one point, he snapped his fingers lightly and motioned toward the glasses. "Rachel, get the drinks," he said, as though it were second nature. All eyes turned briefly toward me, expecting compliance. Instead, I placed the pitcher gently on the table, straightened my back, and let a calm smile spread across my face. "Actually," I said evenly, my tone cutting through the hum of chatter, "I think it's time we tell the truth about who's been serving who." The room fell quiet. Forks paused midair, conversations broke off. David's smile faltered as I reached into the folder I had tucked away earlier. With steady hands, I laid out the first sheet in front of me, the black and white words sharp under the "These," I began, my voice clear and steady, "are emails where I completed entire projects that David later claimed as his own work. Every late-night report, every carefully worded presentation, written by me, signed with his name." I slid the papers down the table so they could see for themselves. Murmurs rippled through the room, but I didn't stop. I brought out receipts next, the ones showing purchases far beyond his income. "And here," I continued, tapping the highlighted totals, "are charges made not with his paycheck, but with credit that doesn't belong to him. The necklace Lindsay wears tonight, the gadgets he brags about, the outings he boasts of funding, none of it came from his hard work." Lindsay's face drained of color as she leaned closer to the receipts, her expression hardening with every line she read. David's boss shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing as he examined the evidence. My parents looked stunned, their forks resting on their plates, their gazes flicking between David and me as if trying to process what they were hearing. Finally, I pulled out the stack of records showing bills I had paid in silence. Utility statements, grocery invoices, car repairs. "And these," I said, laying them one by one, "show every time I covered for him. Every time he took credit for stability I created. His so-called success wasn't built on his effort. It was built on my unpaid labor, my sacrifices, and his lies." For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then a collective gasp broke the silence, sharp and heavy. No one spoke. No one laughed. The weight of the truth settled over the table, leaving David exposed in the very place he had hoped to shine. The silence in the room shattered when David's boss slammed his hand against the table, his face red with anger. "So all those presentations you bragged about," he said sharply, "they weren't even yours?" His voice carried the kind of disappointment that cut deeper than yelling. David stammered, searching for words, but the stack of papers in front of him offered no escape. Across the table, Lindsay's expression twisted from shock to disgust. She tugged at the necklace resting on her collarbone, her lips pressed in a thin line. "So this is what you call spoiling me?" she snapped, holding up one of the receipts with trembling fingers. "It wasn't even your money." She pushed her chair back abruptly, the legs screeching against the floor, and stormed out without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the house, leaving a hollow silence behind her. Our parents sat frozen in their chairs, forks untouched, their eyes darting between me and David. For years they had celebrated him, praising his charm, his so-called brilliance, while asking me to stay in the background. Now, with evidence laid bare, they couldn't deny the truth staring them in the face. My father's hand hovered near his glass, but he didn't lift it. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, yet no words came. They both looked smaller somehow, weighed down by the realization of what they had allowed all along. David broke the quiet with a roar of frustration. He shoved the papers aside, his voice rising. "She's lying. She's twisting everything." His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. "You all know me. You know what I've accomplished. This is just jealousy talking." But his outburst only made the truth more obvious. The documents lay scattered across the table, undeniable and damning. His boss leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the disappointment etched deep into his features. My parents stayed mute, unable to shield him this time. The louder David shouted, the more powerless he appeared, his carefully constructed image crumbling with every desperate word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I sat straight, my hands folded in my lap, letting the evidence speak for itself. For once, I wasn't the one cleaning up his mess or hiding in his shadow. I wasn't the one swallowing my pride to keep the peace. The balance had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. As David raged, I remained steady. The control that had always belonged to him now rested in my hand. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet helper. I wasn't invisible. I was the one with the power, and he knew it. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread quickly. Word of the dinner reached David's workplace, and his boss wasted no time pulling him aside. Without the illusion of competence, there was nothing left to shield him. Projects slipped through his fingers, co-workers whispered behind his back, and soon the promotion he had bragged about turned into a seat on probation. The man who once strutted with confidence now avoided eye contact, his voice subdued, his charm useless. At home, the absence of Lindsay was impossible to ignore. She never came back after walking out that night. Her belongings disappeared from his apartment, and her number no longer answered his calls. The necklace she had once flaunted was returned in a small box, left on the porch without a note. For the first time, David had to face life without a partner to echo his praises or a sister to quietly carry his weight. Meanwhile, I felt something inside me shift. For so long, I had convinced myself my place was behind him, propping him up, keeping peace in a house where I was barely seen. Now, with the truth exposed, I realized how much of myself I had buried to make room for his spotlight. I didn't want to live in the shadows anymore. I gathered the applications I had once tucked away and filled them out carefully, my hand steady as I wrote my own name in spaces that belonged to me. The college program I had abandoned years before was still open to me, and this time I wasn't letting it pass by. When I dropped the envelope into the mailbox, I felt lighter than I had in years, like a door had opened that I never believed I could walk through. My parents reached out after the dust settled. Their words were softer now, heavy with guilt, but I couldn't let them smooth it over so easily. They wanted forgiveness, dinners together, moments to rewrite what had already been done. I didn't shut them out completely, but I kept my distance. This time, my energy wasn't going toward fixing anyone else's comfort. It was going toward me. Nights that once blurred into chores and silence became filled with plans, study guides, and visions of the future I had once sacrificed. The more I leaned into myself, the clearer it became. My worth was never tied to being his shadow. It had always been mine to claim. David's golden boy image crumbled into dust, but I rose from the pieces stronger than I ever thought possible. That night at the dinner table hadn't just shocked the people who watched it unfold. It shocked me most of all, because in standing up to him, I discovered something I had never believed I could feel. I realized I'd never be anyone's mate again. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away, or should I have forgiven them? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned.